If the latest figures from the National Bureau of Statistics are anything to go by, Nigerians are breathing a sigh of relief, you could say, because the prices of goods and services have reduced for the fifth consecutive month. In the latest report, headline inflation, which refers to the total inflation rate within an economy, fell to 20.12% in August, down from 21.88% in July. Food inflation rate was also down this month, which should mean you're paying less for your food. But are Nigerians really paying less for food? I mean, that's the big question. This seems like good news for Nigerians who for years have had to tighten their belts due to a cost of living crisis. Farmers, however, said the cost to produce and transport food has not reduced, and that the government cannot use pronouncements to bring the cost of food items down, making reduction in food prices unsustainable. They also said the government's policies are undermining local production and worsening food insecurity. So what do these figures and statistics really mean? How does it impact the average Nigerian out there on the street? I'm now joined on the line from Lagos by prominent economist and the CEO of Financial Derivatives Company Limited, Bismarck Rewane. Glad to have you join us on Arise Prime Time.
Good.
All right.
Good evening, and thank you for having me today.
Fantastic. Inflation down to 20.12% compared to 20.88% in the preceding month of July. What does this portend? What brought about this fall? Is it a reflection of what the government is doing? And then the most important, how does it impact the man out there on the street?
Okay, good evening. What we must understand is that let us take a panoramic view of what these numbers mean. One, these numbers have come down from 21.88 to 20.12. So that's truly, and all economists expected a moderation, but not of this magnitude. Why the moderation? One. Two, why this magnitude, and what happens next? That's what we are here to discuss this evening. First thing is that there was a rebasing and reconstitution of the basket, right, at the end of last year, and a rebasing of using the new base year. So essentially, the rule of the thumb or back of the envelope analysis would say that if you are to compare oranges with oranges, you have to go back to the old methodology. Under the old methodology, crude way of doing it is to add 10 to whatever it is. Therefore, if I add 10 to 20.12, I will end up at 30% compared to 35%, which was a peak. So whether you like it or not, there's been an improvement and moderation. That is the first thing. Secondly, the basket has been reconstituted. Food used to be 54% of the spending. In other words, if you earn 100,000, they expect you in that methodology to use 54,000 naira on food. Now it has been reduced to 44%, which is good. So reconstitution and rebasing gave you a kind of a fillip. Now, but let us now go into the factors. You see that by this time last year, the exchange rate was 1,625. Today, the exchange rate is 1,523 in the parallel market. So there has been exchange rate appreciation. In fact, the naira has more or less appreciated against the basket of currencies. Two, in the last 12 months, there have been 8 reductions by the Dangote refinery and 3 increases. So generally speaking, at this time last year, it was about 1,200 per liter, and now it's about 841 per liter. So there's been at least a 400 naira or so reduction in the pump price of PMS, and diesel more substantially, diesel at 10.20. So when you take transportation cost, logistics cost, and powering cost, you find that came down. Thirdly, we have a reduction in the money supply growth, because money supply is the engine and is the basic phenomenon that drives inflation. So we see money supply growth come down to about 15.8%, where it used to be about almost 24, 25, and 26% last year. So if you take the factors one after the other, fundamentally, there's been an appreciation in the currency. Secondly, there's been a reconstitution of the basket, which gave you some technical factors. Then we also had the reduction in the price of PMS. Finally, we have the harvest season. This harvest season, good weather has had an impact, and therefore the price of commodities have come down. Now, if you look at the commodities themselves and compare them to what it was last year, a tuber of yam in September 2024 was 10,500. Today, it is 12,000, so that increased. Eggs at this time last year was 6,000 naira a crate of 30 eggs. It is now down to 5,000. There was a reduction of 16%. Beans was 160,000 naira in September 2024. It's now down by 53% to 75,000 naira. And that we are talking about oloyin and beans. Rice, at this time last year, that was in September, August, it was 88,000. It came down to 85 and is now down to 80,000 naira in September. Gari was 40,000 naira at this time last year, is now down to 28,000. And tomatoes, which was 50,000 at this time last year, has actually increased to 75,000. Wheat flour stayed flat. So all in all, we've seen almost a 20% drop in the synthetic basket that we created, right? So the harvest effect, the reduction in the price of petrol, thanks to the Dangote Group, the money supply moderation and mopping up and interest rates by the Central Bank of Nigeria, and more than anything else, the appreciation of the currency. These are the factors that have led to this moderation. Is it sustainable? That is the next question we have to deal with.
You talked about rebasing. Let's look at that issue. Analysts point out that the rebasing, we'll come to why rebasing in the first place, but let's look at this. Analysts point out that the rebasing confirmed some uncomfortable truths, with service, for example, at 53%, agric at 25.8%, industry is trailing. What do you make of these numbers I just pointed out from a development point of view? Suggestive of regression?
No, let me take rebasing of the GDP is different from using a new base year for inflation. There are two different variables. So if we are here, we are talking about inflation, then we talk about GDP. GDP just actually, rebasing of the GDP means that the new base year is more reflective of current behavioral patterns and consumption patterns in the economy and production patterns. Reconstituting of the basket means that if in 15 years ago you spent only 2% or 3% of your income on airtime and communication, and now it has moved because you're spending more airtime, there's 5G and all of that, and it's now about maybe 7 or 8%. You have to reflect that, and that is what the reconstitution of the basket, and typically people do this every 10 years. In some cases, if there's a violent change in consumer behavior, then you can do it earlier than that. But that is, so let's not confuse issues. The most important thing is that we're talking today about inflation, and one of the reasons why inflation has moderated is because the basket has been reconstituted, and secondly, people's behavioral patterns have also changed. And most importantly is the fact that people's incomes have eroded because there's wage inflation and price inflation. Wages have been rather stagnant and static. So what has happened is that consumers are resisting price increases and switching to substitutes. So if the product is price elastic, they switch to those substitutes. If it's price inelastic, and what I mean by that is that, for example, salt is price inelastic. There's no amount that you can reduce the price of salt that will make you consume more. Whilst sugar is elastic, and if the price drops, you probably buy more and consume more because of your taste buds and all of that. But the way to understand it is that there's inflation, price inflation. There's also the fact that there are factors, fiscal factors and monetary policy factors, that lead to either moderation or exaggeration of inflation. But if you look at the trend, it has come down all the way from 33 in the old value, all the way now to, if I use the new factor, to 20.12. Yes, this is a good trend. But if you look at other countries, say across Africa, Ghana had inflation as high as 54%. It's now down to about almost 6.54%. Across South Africa is below 5%. And of course, in the CFA franc zone in West Africa, because of the French support, they are actually about 2 or 3%. So we have long ways to go. But how does this affect demand on the street? Because economics is not just a numeric science, it's now a behavioral science. And so you have to consider whether the data is telling the truth about people. National income is different from national welfare and national happiness. So those are the things that the government should be and is trying to ensure that the people feel the effect of these policies. And policies alone do not do it. It's policies, there's institutional reform, there's impact and the transmission effect to where people begin to feel the effect of these policies. And that's where the political economic equation comes into equilibrium.
Yeah, but interestingly, I did ask before you came on air, I did ask 1 or 2, 3 people here in the studio, has your expenses reduced? And the chorus was, no, our expenses has not reduced. We're still paying more for food. But we'll probably talk more about this rebasing because I also brought it up. There are some factors. I mean, some analysts are talking about it. The fact that it is not, but I'll come back to it and we'll still address that. This inflation down comes or came on a day Wale, the Minister of Finance, asked customs to suspend the free on board, that's FOB levies by customs on imported goods. Any correlation?
Yes. No, I think what is happening is that there's a revenue objective, right? And then there's the inflation objective. The revenue, while they're doing the Minister of Finance and Cornelius Minister of the Economy, is targeting how to improve the revenue profile, right? So that the government has more money to spend on and have an impact on people's lives. On the other hand, the Central Bank of Nigeria is using interest rates to affect people's, what we call the marginal propensity to consume and save, so that there's some kind of balance. But at the end of the day, what people want to see is that if inflation moderates, which is what you are alluding to, then it means that your purchasing power actually begins to increase. But don't forget, inflation measures a rate of increase in prices. It does not mean that prices are coming down. It depends on what is in the basket. So there's disinflation and deflation. Disinflation is when the rate of inflation is slowing. Deflation is when the price of goods actually come down, probably below the cost, and can lead to a depression in an economy. But so that we don't bore the viewers out there, we should kind of focus on what the key issues are. The prices last year compared to the prices this year, and where are we going down the road? We believe that the inflation is going to moderate due to a number of factors which I've already highlighted. But at the same time, there are some threats and some early warning signals or signs that anything could happen. If the price of oil was to drop to $60 a barrel, and the federal government of Nigeria revenue begins to drop, the federal government of Nigeria will have no choice but to begin to increase its fiscal deficit, which leads to inflation, and you have to deal with that. But the reality is that if certain steps have not been taken, your fiscal deficit as a percentage of your GDP today is about 4%, which is very good compared to where it was. It was about 6 or 7%, and it was going to go to 8 or 9% if the subsidies, which are reverse taxes, were not reduced significantly. And that is having an effect on the people. People are suffering and claiming. But the problem here is that the money has been taken away from consumers and given to the government. Is the government spending the money on the right things, which is having a positive multiplier effect on growth That is the question. So that is the question that is being asked by the people, and rightfully so. They are demanding that, look, we must see value for money. We've seen FAC increase by a factor of 3. We've seen government revenues increase by a major factor, but we are not feeling the effect in terms of the bottom line. Are people happier today than they were 2 years ago? That's a big question that we need to address. And so how do you go about it? First and foremost, there are 3 major variables that people spend money on. 1 is food, 2 is accommodation, and 3 is health care, right? And obviously, finally, the 4th factor is actually education. You have to. If the government is spending and providing these services, then people will spend less, right, on those factors, and that will give them more disposable income and increase the people's level of happiness and the utility of these factors. But what is happening today is that the revenue has increased, the expenditure has increased, but the impact of that expenditure is not directed and targeted at the right right people in the
society
segment of the society.
Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
You're raising a very good point. I mean, for example, how's the common man being impacted in all this? Is it just a question of numbers? I mean, school has just, I don't think you added transportation. I mean, school just resumed. That parents are lamenting the high cost of education, for example, like you did point out.
Yes, that is true. First of all, you can't make omelette without breaking eggs. So it is true that education cost has increased. And if you look at it globally, everywhere in the world, cost of education has increased. What it takes to educate and actually improve the mindset and the quality of thinking of people has become more expensive. But what it does do is that you know that an improved education means higher productivity. Higher productivity means lower prices in the long run. And so that is what has happened. You've seen that in the history of mankind, there have been 5 revolutions. The agrarian revolution, the industrial revolution, the technological revolution, the digital revolution, and now we're having the artificial intelligence revolution. Every revolution has multiplied and increased the output of society. We were doing maybe $10 trillion before. We are now at about $115 trillion global GDP and output. But the second part of it is that it has increased the difference between the rich and the poor, between the haves and the have-nots. It has made society much more stratified and making it impossible. Therefore, you can see that in 3 days ago, Larry Ellison of Oracle had $110 billion added to his wealth. That $110 billion is more than the GDP of about almost 20 countries. So can you imagine that distortion to wealth and the distribution?
Now, we can't talk about the impact on people without talking about food security. You agree? What do you make of the president's directive to the NEC to force down prices vis-a-vis the stance of farmers and rice millers who argue that mere pronouncements cannot override market forces or compensate for poor planning? They say for cost of food to go down, transportation cost must necessarily go down.
You see, they say talk is cheap. Anybody can say what he likes, and we cannot control what they say. But the reality is that it takes more than an announcement or pronouncement to bring down prices. Prices do not go down on their own. They go down because the cost of production has been reduced. It means that the margins have been kept and competition has kicked in. So to a large extent, I try to ignore the hallucination of political statements, and I try to focus on the reality. The reality is that prices will only go down when the cost of production goes down. And one way of bringing down the cost, let us face it, is power supply. You cannot have 5,000 megawatts of power for 200 million people and think that you are going to produce and increase productivity. It has to change. Something dramatic has to happen. Something, transformational has to happen. So first and foremost, we started by trying to bail out the Gencos and the Discos trying to give them some forbearance here and there. And we have to now ensure that people are now producing, because for every 1,000 megawatts increase in power, there's like almost a 0.3, 0.4% increase in GDP. So can you imagine if we went from 5 to 8,000, 3,000 megawatts, we could easily get 1%, if not 1.5% increase in GDP. And for a GDP of $250 billion, 1% increase there is $2.5 billion. You're talking about $7 billion. That is significant. So we have to begin to ask ourselves, do we really want to do this thing, or are we just trying to grab at pies in the sky?
Yeah. Well, under the present statistics, I'll ask you these two questions. Under the present statistics and indices, is Tinubu's 1 trillion economy feasible? I mean, some have said this is overtly optimistic. And then the president recently said he has achieved his non-oil revenue goal, not borrowing any longer, and has achieved economic stability. What's your assessment of the president's claim? Those two questions.
No, he said he's aspiring to get to $1 trillion by the year 2030, right?
Yeah.
So to achieve that, you need to grow about almost 8 or 9% a year between now and then, right? To go from 3% average growth to 9 or 10% growth needs an industrial or economic revolution of some sort. But you see, aspirations are good, and you have to shoot for the star. Shoot for the moon. No, shoot for the moon. And even if you fail, you'll be one of the stars. So if you do something about power, and you also do some other things about productivity, you will definitely be moving in the same direction. But to achieve that goal of $1 trillion is going to be a very difficult, it's a big ask at this time.
A big ask. You want to address the issue of he's saying he has achieved his non-oil revenue goal, not borrowing, even so some are contesting that fact, and no longer, and has achieved what he calls economic stability. I want your assessment of the president's claim.
No, revenue goals and growth goals are two different things, right? And don't forget, Nigeria is a federation. Therefore, you have the central government, and you have 774 local governments, and you have 36 states. So when the president speaks, he speaks for the nation as a whole, but he has limited control over state governments and all of that. So that is not the true issue. Is that revenue goes, and by increasing the taxes, right, that is removal of subsidies, you've actually taken money from the people and put it in the hands of government. Now, what do you do with what have you achieved with the money, the increased revenue? We've seen FAC increase. We've seen a lot of projects that are being commissioned, or I mean foundation stones and all of that being laid. But the reality is that it must have an effect on the people. So first of all, revenue increases. Second, spending increases. But expenditure is not the same thing as investment. The balance sheet of a company, if your expenses go into what they call the operating expenses, but your investment is capitalized, right? So you have an investment, and then you have the investment multiplier. We should not confuse the two. Accountants at times mix the two, but economists have a clear understanding that the investment has an investment multiplier effect on national income, while accountants look at how the budget is balanced and how the deficit is funded. So there's some nomenclature issues here and slight misunderstanding of concepts, but one can allow for that based on the professional thinking and training of the individuals who are in policy-making positions.
Before I let you go, Bismarck, what should government really be doing to get the people feel the effect? Because the bottom line anyway is that the people's income in the people's pocket go up, they pay less, they have food on the table. So with all the grammar and all the numbers, if the people are not being affected positively, it looks like you're just flowing in the wind. I don't know who sang that song. So if you're asked to advise the government, for example, I remember that music, Blowing in the Wind. So what will you tell the government to be
Yes.
doing so that the people can feel the impact of what they're saying?
First of all, there are so many things to be done, but you have to prioritize, and let us identify 4 areas. Firstly, you've got to manage the external misalignment of the currency to make sure it is aligned and is fair value, and I think we're in that path. Secondly, you cannot do anything without the power supply transformation and revolution. We've got to do that, and we've got to make sure that with that we are guaranteed an increase. Thirdly, you have to embark on concessioning of some government assets, i.e. the Highway Development Management Initiative, where there have been about maybe 17 or 18 roads that have been concessioned. Only one has been handed over to the concessionaire. The Minister of Works has to ensure immediately that those roads are concessioned and the people, concessionaires, and go to site and start working. That is very transformative, and I'm sure the work is going on in that direction because we need to focus on that. And finally, the whole idea of education. We have too many children out of school. Our education is, to a large extent, of poor quality. We need to increase the quality and capacity of our people, because without that, we are done. So if you do those 4 things and focus on them properly and reduce the leakages within government, I think that is very, very important. Revenues have increased, but the cost of collection has also increased sharply. So we must collect revenues in an efficient manner and make sure that the revenues are used to deliver value to the people. At the end of the day, it's the people that own the country, and they are the ones we all account to.
Democracy is for the people, by the people. That's how it is said. Thank you so much. You couldn't have capped it better. Economist, CEO of Financial Derivatives Company Limited, Bismarck, Rewane. Always interesting discussing with you. Thank you.